You're dealing with tight hip flexors, it can actually have a huge impact in regards to how your hip functions as well as how your back functions. Because your hip flexors actually start off at the base of your hip right here and actually attaches to the front end of your spine, which is actually going to be responsible for lifting that leg up. But if those hip flexors are active a little bit too much, they can actually pull your spine into what is called extension. And that can actually cause a little bit more of a pinch, which can irritate the nerves and actually exit the spine, causing symptoms that are happening in the back, buttock, and even down the leg. So this is my go-to routine, that something that can be implemented on a daily basis. And really the most important part throughout all this, you can do all the stretches and all the exercises, but the key when it comes to dealing with these tight hip flexors is actually addressing how you're moving and how you're standing, which is actually what I'm going to talk about at the end of the video. But for starters, it's a lot about loosening up the hip flexors, which actually can also compose the top portion of your thigh. So what you're going to do is you're going to be sitting down, and you can take a stick, a wooden spoon, anything, and you are going to be massaging your thigh by pressing downwards and rubbing up and down. I like to do it when your leg is kind of flexed like this. You put a little bit more slack on the muscle and allows you to go a little bit deeper. I definitely recommend rolling out for about 90 seconds to 2 minutes. The other option is if you can tolerate, actually no, the other option, don't even think about it, but this will be a great way to loosen things up, allowing the hip flexors to move a little bit more. From there, we want to actually think about unlocking the hips, helping you actually understand that we're actually moving at the hips as compared to the lower back. And so while you're still sitting on a chair, you're going to be placing your feet about shoulders width apart. And from here, you're going to push your knees out so that the knees aren't caving in, they're pushing out, allows your torso to move freely. And then from here, you're going to be resting onto your sit bones, and you're going to rock your torso forward and back. And really the key is that as you're rocking forward and back, the shape of your spine does not change, but the angle does. And that's actually going to teach your body that you are going to have an opportunity to move at the hip as compared to the low back. From there, we're going to take it down to the ground, the bed, or treatment table. And that's where we're going to work on some pelvic tilts and heel slides. Pelvic tilts in general, we're thinking about taking that pubic bone and that rib cage and we're compressing. If we're dealing with one specific tight hip flexor, you can combine the pelvic tilt with the heel slide. And so what you're going to do is you're going to get onto your back and you're going to keep your knees bent, because if your hip flexors are really tight and you try to straighten your leg out, it's going to pull on your back a lot. So what you're going to do is you're going to get onto your back, take your rib cage, pull your rib cage and pubic bone together, and then take the effective leg. You're going to drive your heel into the ground slowly, slide that heel to the point where you can feel all that tension, and then you're going to slide it on back, making sure that you're not eliciting that same type of pain response by engaging your abs, keeping everything tight, so you allow your hip flexors to move within the range of motion that is available. I recommend about 10 to 15 repetitions, making sure you're breathing throughout the entire time. From there, once we loosen up the hip flexor, we have to strengthen our glutes to allow our bodies to be moving the way that it should. So from there, we are going into a bridge. When you're in this position, the key is taking your rib cage, pulling your rib cage and pubic bone down together. You can pick your toes up and you're going to drive your hips into the ceiling. The goal is to make sure that you feel your butt engage as tight as you can, and then you're going to go ahead and lower. You might feel like you are only able to get to this point, and that's totally fine, as long as you can feel your buttocks move. If you don't feel your butt move, it is totally okay to slide your feet forward or slide your feet back or push your knees out, depending on where you are able to actually feel your butt muscles engage. Complete about 15 to 20 repetitions so you can truly feel your butt activate. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to address hip internal rotation and hip external rotation. You can do this on both sides, but for the sake of time, we're only going to be addressing the affected side, where you are going to be laying down. and your affected side is going to be up, and your hips are going to be bent at about 45 degrees. Your heels will be touching, your feet will be together, and you are going to be lifting that knee up off the floor and then back down, making sure that your feet and your hips are the pivot point. You also want to make sure that your hips are pointing straight up towards the ceiling, allowing you to focus on addressing that butt muscle. Again, 15 to 20 repetitions with that. Ideally, you want those hips to be flexed. That's external rotation. We're going to go in the opposite direction, and this is called a reverse clamshell. So instead of having your knees bent up here, you're going to lower so that pretty much you're shooting for a straight line between your shoulders, your hips, and your knees. From here, you're going to go ahead and keep your knees together. You're going to let your foot come up off your other foot and then back down. We're thinking about rotating. What you should be feeling is right here in the buttock is going to be engaged. It's kind of like from where your butt crack is to the outside portion of your hip. So if we're doing those clamshells, we want our hips to be bent like this, but when we're doing those reverse clamshells, we want our foot out to be the other way. You're gonna go 15 to 20 repetitions per affected side. Once you are done with that, we're gonna move on to another stretch, which is gonna be focusing on addressing hip extension and standing. And this is where we're actually going to be focusing on no equipment with this. You can put your hands on a bar, 1 foot forward, the affected side back. You wanna make sure that that back heel is turned out, you're squeezing your butt. You're going to actually focus on driving through, and as you can see, it's the movement of my hip and not the movement of my back that's actually going to be allowing this hip to stretch out. You should feel a lot of tension in the front of your hip as you're doing that. And the way that you can prevent any sort of arching is by taking those ribs, pulling it down, and squeezing your butt. You're going to be moving in and out into this pressure for about 90 seconds to 2 minutes. And last but not least, we have leg swings. This is actually going to allow us to be able to freely swing that leg so we can truly experience movement at the hip, and you can actually spend a little bit more time just giving you an opportunity to be able to feel, is my leg swinging forward and back? And you can go about 15 to 20 repetitions forward and back. And I lied, we have one more exercise, which is going to be making sure you're keeping your hips even, because when you're standing up, it's really easy to let that hip come out. So when you lift that leg up, you need to make sure that it's this butt cheek engaging. So what you can do is you can stand on one leg, you can use your hand to balance, you're gonna let your hip pop out, and then you're gonna pull your hip back up, and we're gonna end up going 15 of these exercises, and that's where we're gonna stabilize what we call our glute medius. And when we have our glutes active, our hip flexors can work a little less aggressively. And so I said before, all these exercises are great, but the key is actually allowing you to understand that you don't necessarily need to try to stand up tall. This isn't standing up tall. This is standing up tall, where you're actually allowing your hips to come backwards and your rib cage to come down. You'll feel initially like you're hunching forward, but you're gonna go from super arched to neutral, and you're gonna be standing up nice and tall, and it's going to allow you to feel a lot better in your hips, your back, and also even your neck.